Hello, welcome to For the Love of Weather. This is the podcast where we explore the Earth's atmosphere and how we are all connected through the weather and climate. We are your hosts, Gemma and Aisling. We're both meteorologists and weather presenters, and we've been working in weather now for over 15 years. We are so happy to have you here on the podcast with us today. And as always, we hope that you leave this episode loving the weather just that little bit more and learn a little something about how the weather and climate can impact our daily lives. Hi, I'm Gemma.
Hi, I'm Aisling. So our next guest is Ed Hawkins, Professor Ed Hawkins, may I add, MBE as well. I didn't actually realize you were an MBE. Pretty amazing. But it is very difficult to give an introduction of this magnitude because for myself and Gemma, Professor Ed Hawkins is somebody who we have both followed for a long time, massively admire your work, but more so how somebody of your caliber and capacity can just really get into the public psyche, and it's probably one of the hardest things that you can do with climate change. But if for some reason you don't know Professor Ed Hawkins, who's a climate scientist at the University of Reading, you will definitely know his climate stripes or his climate spirals as well. One of the most profound and simple ways to show how quickly our climate is changing. There are so many things that Ed is before he is at this point. Also astrophysics as well. So looking up, not looking down into our beautiful climate. So you actually started looking out in space. But one of the biggest things that I love that you do is the citizen projects and trying to reclaim all of the data. And I know it's something that you're really passionate about. And I was very lucky to be at a dinner with you recently, and I heard you talk about why that's so important. And I hadn't fully comprehended that. And so that's something that we'd love to talk about here today. But you have so many accolades. I can't even imagine how many papers you've actually been involved in over the years and how many students you've helped. But for us, we are so thrilled to have you on the podcast, and you are so very welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It sounds fantastic.
So we just always like to start by asking, where was your first little spark of joy that you thought to yourself, I might just do something with the weather or climate or atmospheric physics? What happened? Talk us through that journey.
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, I started off life as an astrophysicist. I did my PhD studying distant galaxies, and came to the end of my PhD and was wondering what to do next. And at that point, I didn't fancy a life in academia. I actually left academia and got a job in the real world for a year and found I didn't like that either. And this was around about 2003. And I think probably the heat wave of that summer probably kickstarted a few ideas and made climate change quite relevant and real to many people. We saw thousands of people die across Europe in that extraordinary heat wave of summer 2003. And so after that, I decided to do a master's, and I went to Reading to do a master's in maths and meteorology. And my plan at that point was to go and work for the Met Office. I thought that would be a great thing to do, but I kind of got distracted in Reading by the amazing research that was going on there, and I never actually ended up leaving. And I've been a researcher in Reading ever since.
It's funny how people never end up leaving places. You just sort of fell in love with it. Do you want to talk us back to that summer of 2003? Just tell us a little bit more perhaps about the emotional side of it for you and like
Yeah, well,
why
it was
you were like, okay, right, this means something to me.
it was extraordinarily hot that summer, and obviously lots of people were talking about the changes that we've seen, and it probably hadn't really sort of become real to me, climate change at that point. We'd obviously studied it at school and heard about it a lot on the news, but I think to me that summer made it real. And we heard all the stories about, particularly in France, thousands of deaths, tens of thousands of deaths across the country, and that made me realise that astrophysics is wonderful. It's a fascinating subject, and I still love it, but it's not very relevant for people. And so I felt like I needed to do something that was more relevant to people in our everyday lives. And so that's why I thought about making the switch.
So talk us back through actually just in more recent times, one of the biggest projects and undertakings of getting some data digitized. It was during a really complicated time in the world. We're all in the middle of COVID. Do you want to just talk us through that and what you got from it?
Yeah, so we were having a meeting in Reading in February 2020, during one of the wettest months we've ever had in the UK, exceptionally wet February in 2020. And we were sat in Reading discussing all of the weather and climate data that the UK held on paper that was still not available to scientists. and Catherine Ross, who is the chief archivist at the National Meteorological Archive in Exeter, was there, and she was telling us about how they had just finished scanning a set of documents called the 10-year rainfall sheets. So these are 66,000 pieces of paper. Each one has a decade's worth of monthly rainfall observations for a single location. And these were still handwritten on paper, unique copies sitting in the archives. And essentially, almost none of them had ever been digitized, turned into digital data that we can use and analyze. And so these pieces of paper represented a giant gap in our understanding of our variations in rainfall across the UK. And we recognised that this was potentially a very valuable source of information, that if we were able to somehow get these 5 million observations transcribed from paper to digital data, we could reconstruct variations in weather across the UK far better than we could at that time already. And we could probably go back even further as well to look at some extreme events even further back in time. So that was the context and the motivation. And of course, at that time, the start of the COVID pandemic was being much more discussed. I remember thinking about it, quite a lot at that time, and it became quite clear quite quickly after that meeting in Reading that this was going to be actually an opportunity, because we recognised, seeing the pictures from elsewhere in the world of what was going on, that it was likely that we were going to end up staying at home for an extended period. People were needing a distraction from the news going on in the world, and potentially some people were going to have more spare time on their hands as well. And so we very quickly decided that we were going to try and build a project to ask for volunteers to help us transcribe these 5 million numbers from these 66,000 images into digital numbers that we could use. And so, we quickly put together the website. So there's a wonderful tool called the Zooniverse, which is used for all kinds of these citizen science projects where people have questions they want to ask about images and videos and so on. We've used that platform before, and it's very easy to use and set up. And so, we set up the project and put it online. And exactly 5 years ago today, actually, from when we're recording this, we set the project live and expected that it was going to take months and months and months to finish.
And
How long did it take?
16 days.
Oh, wow.
So it was an utterly extraordinary response. So the BBC put an article on their website which helped people understand what was going on. So John Amos wrote that for the BBC, and it was fantastically helpful. We had 6,000 volunteers in the first day. We finished a whole decade of data in one day, which I never imagined that we would ever get close to doing. Over the next few days, we grew to about 16,000 volunteers. They typed 100 million keystrokes in 16 days to make sure that all of these numbers were transcribed 4 times each. So we could pick up any typos, as well as all the location information as well that was on the sheets. And then we had a digital record of these 5.3 million rainfall observations safely in the bank, which we could then look at.
That's absolutely amazing.
Yeah,
it was extraordinary, and I remember John Amos, the BBC journalist, said, "Well, how long is this going to take, Ed? You run these things before," and I said, "Well, this is by far and away the biggest thing we've ever considered doing with volunteers. It'll take months and months and months," and it didn't.
It's that gorgeous, the power of the people.
Absolutely,
when they come together, out of darker times can come something really wonderful.
Yeah.
Did you, out of interest, did you find anything from that data that was transcribed? Did you find any trends in that data that you didn't know before?
So it actually took another 18 months or so. So 8 of the volunteers that joined the project initially were so enthusiastic they wanted to keep going. And so actually there was quite a big job to do to ensure that all the data had been typed correctly, which it had virtually in every case. But we needed to identify the exact latitude and longitude of where every observation was taken. And those latitudes and longitudes were not recorded on every sheet. And so we had to do a bit of detective work. And so these 8 volunteers dug through ancestry information and census information and old maps and figured out the latitude and longitude as well as they could for every single observation. And so they took a while to do that. But then 18 months later, we were able to publish the data set with all of the time, the latitude, the longitude, the time, and the amount for every single observation that we could. And then we provided that data to the Met Office, who are then able to integrate it with all of the other observations they have, and then produce a much more coherent, consistent, improved monitoring rainfall statistics for the whole of the UK. And so one of the key things we were able to do was to push back the start of when we could do that. So the Met Office could only try that from about the 1860s onwards when we started the project, but we were able to push that back to 1836. There was enough data across the whole country to reconstruct monthly rainfall variations back to 1836. So the whole reign of Queen Victoria to Queen Elizabeth and beyond. And importantly, also, we could add a lot more spatial detail and confidence in the data before the 1960s, which is the bit that was missing. And so we're now very confident about the variations in rainfall for 180 something years.
Did you know you were living through history? Is that like something you think about, that you've literally changed like a bit of history?
So this is why we do this, is to make the contributions of the people who took those observations valuable again. You know, a lot of the people who took the observations were volunteers themselves. They were doing it in their own back garden. You know, some of it were doing it for their work, but many were just doing it because of scientific interest back in the Victorian era. And so, yeah, there's definitely a sense that we were recovering their efforts and making their efforts valuable and useful to modern science today. You know, they could have never dreamt of the uses that we were going to put that data to, but to make it valuable again seems like a very worthwhile effort to me.
Are there any other data sets around the world that are still on paper that you would like to digitize and be able to look at in more detail?
Endless numbers. Yeah. So, you know, just in the UK, I reckon there's probably 1 billion weather observations still on paper. A lot of those are from ships. So the National Archives in Kew has 6 million pages from the Royal Naval Ship Logbook collection, stretching back to 18 something, a long time ago, of ships traveling the world, taking observations every 4 hours often. And hardly any of those sheets have ever been looked at. They've never been scanned, not even the book's been opened, probably in many cases. And they're just sitting on the shelves, being looked after by the National Archives. Yeah, and so all that data would be amazingly valuable if we could extract it and turn it into digital data that we could hand over to the climate scientists who build these data sets to integrate and then improve our knowledge and fill in all the gaps that we have.
So I'm gonna ask you a question now. So we have all of this data, right? So it goes back a couple of hundred years, and the biggest thing that I get written in anytime I do anything in the weather is, how do you know what the data was before we had, actual records? How do you approach that answer?
So I guess for rainfall, it's quite easy because we're still using copper rain gauges, the same technology as we had 200 years ago. We're still using that today. And so the technology hasn't changed over that time. We still manually go out and measure the amount of rain that's fallen in this rain gauge every day. And so that is, that's a very helpful piece of information to have, is that we've done this in a consistent way for all of that time. You know, we have photographs of people taking the observations in some cases back in time. We have the paper records. And so, yeah, we can be confident that, what is written on those pieces of paper is the amount of rainfall that was measured at the time using basically the same technology as we have today.
So before we started actually collecting data, so the climatology, so yeah, one of the most popular emails I get is that the climate has always been changing. How do we know that we're not in, just a blip, that we're in just another little climate change?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's obviously true. The climate has always changed of the Earth for many reasons. Plate tectonics moves the continents around, and that changes our climate. The Earth's orbit around the sun changes. The tilt of the Earth changes. All of these things affect the climate, but they vary on timescales of thousands or tens of thousands of years, and those changes happen very slowly over that time. What we're seeing now over the last 100 and 150 years is a very, very rapid change compared to anything we've seen before in our understanding of how fast things have changed. And so, yes, the size and the speed of the change are, essentially unprecedented in our historical records, going back as far as we can tell. But more importantly, we understand the physics of why it's happening. We've understood since about the 1820s that there is something in our atmosphere which means the planet is warmer than it should be. And in the 1850s and 1860s, scientists like Eunice Foote and John Tyndall worked out the main greenhouse gases that are keeping our atmosphere warmer, and understanding that changing those levels of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere would change our climate. And then in 1938 was the first demonstration that the world is warming. and that was linked at that time in 1938 to the burning of coal and the increase of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. So we've known the basics of the science for more than 150 years, with a very clear observation and an attribution of the change to greenhouse gas changes and burning coal all the way back in 1938.
We're going to move on to the warming stripes in a second. Before we do that, I just wanted to say as well, like in terms of the rainfall records that you haven't translated yet, it seems really sad to think that all that work is there that hasn't been looked at or hasn't been touched. So, if you're ever looking for volunteers, put my hand up. I'm very happy to help transcribe stuff. I'll volunteer Ash as well. She might not be. There you go. We'll both help out with
Totally.
that.
It was the one thing I said to Gemma after I came back from that Met Club meeting. I was like, oh my God, Ed was there. And he was telling me about all of this data that was in Africa and other places. I was the one thing that I said to her, I was like, I had no idea how important all of this was. Like, it really, you hear things sometimes and you think, wow, that is important.
There's data everywhere in the world. Every country has these archives full of paper records. Some have been scanned and some have not. For the UK, the next target, I think, for us is that so we have all of the monthly rainfall totals completed. We've done as much as we can, but nearly all of those sheets have a daily rainfall record associated with them as well. And they're on a separate set of sheets of paper. And there's more than 350,000 pieces of paper with more than 100 million daily rainfall observations on. We have now scanned the majority of those sheets. And so we have 350,000 images of each sheet, which has got 1 year of daily observations for one site on. We have absolutely no idea how we're going to recover that data yet. It's going to need AI because it's too big for volunteers. There's no way we can do that with volunteers. And so obviously the latest developments in AI and machine learning are offering real potential for us to take the next step and try and transcribe all of that missing data. It's a shame because it's wonderful to involve the volunteers because they get a lot out of it, as well as us getting a lot out of it. But the daily rainfall sheets are just too big a project.
It's really exciting to see what records you'll see from all that data once it is like looked at by, say, AI. That would be really, really interesting.
I'm really excited to see where that project goes. I get that, I hear that, and I don't have the skills for that, but I know somebody does somewhere, and it's going to be amazing.
We can't have you on here and not talk about your brilliant warming stripes. Like, we both use them all the time in communicating about climate change. But can you just start off a little bit about explaining about how you came up with the idea about the warming stripes in the first place?
So I was invited to an event at the Hay Festival, the literature festival. And that year in 2018, they had partnered some artists with some scientists to put on 3 special events discussing the intersection between art or books and environmental science. And I was one of the 3 scientists involved. And I was partnered with an amazing author and poet called Nicola Davies, who wrote some amazing kids' books on animals and wildlife, as well as writing poetry. And so we put on this joint event. And so I talked actually about another one of our rescue projects that we'd run at that point about the observers who lived on Ben Nevis. And so I spoke about that project, and Nicola wrote some wonderful poems about that. And I was also looking for a way of communicating long-term climate change in as simple a way as possible for an audience that were there for Nicola's books and Nicola's poems rather than for science. So I was just thinking about how to do it as simply as possible. And part of the inspiration came from a colleague of mine, Professor Ellie Highwood, who the year before had knitted a blanket. Sorry, crocheted a blanket. I always get that wrong. Apparently knitting and crocheting are very different. She'd crocheted a blanket for a friend who was having a baby. And she decided to knit that blanket with stripes made from lots of different colours of wool to represent changes in temperature, particularly global temperature. And she put it online at the time, and lots of the knitting, crocheting community got very excited by it, and it was great. So that was in the back of my mind as well. And so, this combination of this event and that bit of inspiration from the blanket meant that I decided to design this set of graphics which communicated change as simply as possible with just blues and reds to make it as simple and intuitive as possible. And I put them online the day before Hay, and it all went wild, and lots of people loved it. And then I showed them at Hay, and I actually showed at Hay the stripes for the town of Hay itself, because I think that's really important, that we need to ensure that people understand that, yes, the global temperature is changing, but no one really experiences changes in global temperature directly. They experience the climate and weather wherever they happen to live. And pointing out the fact that, yes, the globe is warming, but that means the town of Hay is also warming. You are being affected by this very sort of large scale change that's happening to our planet. And I could see, as soon as I put it on the screen and said what it was, you can see the audience go, oh, I get it now. And that to me made me realize that this simple set of stripes, colored stripes, was able to communicate in a way that other graphics cannot, to audiences who maybe don't like graphics or graphs or traditional types of ways that we communicate. And so the stripes fill in a gap in the way that we communicate. We have to choose our graphics for different audiences, and this is one extra method that we now have to communicate in as simple a way as possible.
I think there's something like quite poignant about. I didn't know that was the origin of those, but that actually it's difficult as a scientist to not speak science and to forget that you're in your own echo chamber every day, and obviously you're using a language that's relatable. But it's really quite a beautiful thing that it came out of, first of all, birth, but also poetry, and so that was the thing that really kind of made that's something that changed for you. And yeah, I don't know, it's quite symbolic, isn't it, that you need a little bit of everything from everyone to.
Yeah, inspiration from lots of different places, and
Yeah.
that's really interesting. And I actually went on a podcast with with data visualization experts, and they said, well, no, how did you know to break the rules of data visualization when you're making this? Because there's no numbers on it, there's no axes, there's no labels. And that, my answer was, well, I didn't know the rules, right? And so because I'd not necessarily been trained in how to do data viz specifically, I wasn't constrained by the rules that everyone's taught. And so that was also an important part of it, I think.
It is. It's like, that's pretty mega. It's awesome. Talk to me about how you felt when you saw your climate spirals in the 2016 Rio Olympics.
Yeah, so before the stripes, I'd made a graphic called the climate spiral, which is an animated image showing global temperatures spiral upwards and outwards. And that was made in 2016. And again, that actually came out of a collaboration as well. So I'd made lots of similar graphics in the past, but a colleague from Norway who I'd never met emailed me on a Friday afternoon and said, I've got a bit of a crazy idea. How about you join the lines together to make a spiral out of some of your previous graphics? And I thought that sounds quite interesting. So I tried it, and then again put it online the following week, and everyone seemed to like it. And that was amazing. And it's been used in lots of different places. NASA now use it quite a lot to communicate climatic changes as well. But then that summer in 2016 was the Rio Olympics, and I was at home watching the opening ceremony, and I'd been out to a well-known build-it-yourself furniture shop that evening, and bought some furniture, which I was sitting at home putting together while I was watching the opening ceremony, not knowing what was about to happen. And suddenly they had a little segment about climate change, and so I sort of paid attention at that point. And then suddenly they had lots of graphics on the screen, and then they showed a version of the climate spiral to probably an audience of 1 billion people at that moment. So that was pretty remarkable. Yeah, I was a bit shocked, to say the least.
I actually remember seeing it and just thinking how amazing it was. But also that Rio Olympics came off the back of the London ones, and there was just something. I know I was in London, so I'm being biased here when I was saying this, but like there was something special about those Olympics. That whole storytelling at the beginning was completely different. So I think there must have been a disproportionate, like an even bigger audience for the 2016 that we're watching. But yeah, were you proud? Did you feel proud?
Yeah, I'm very surprised and very proud. Obviously, I didn't know beforehand. It's obviously top secret, and actually, no one told me afterwards either. It was only by chance that I was watching that I saw it, and so no, it was amazing that they were used, and it's absolutely fantastic.
How things have changed, because I saw that you were an answer on Pointless as well, and I'm sure you've got loads of messages about that.
I was an answer on Pointless. Yes, that was pretty extraordinary too. I wasn't watching that either. But no, I was sent that. It was amazing.
Oh, I love how humble you are over all of this. You're just like this massive thing is happening around you, and you're just like, oh yes, it's just.
And I mean, I was actually Pointless as well. No one answered me correctly, so that was also positive and also negative, because I think it's not. it's about the graphic and people knowing what it means. And I don't mind that people don't know it was me. That's fine. It's about getting the message out. And it is inspiring to see that so many other people have taken the idea and the concept and the graphic and done amazing things with it, independently. They've just taken the graphic and designed all kinds of things, and used it in so many different places. And that's its power. I think that you can take it anywhere and use it to start conversations, and spread the word.
I was going to ask you about that because your graphics appear in lots of different places. Like they're the arms on Reading Football Club's football shirts. Like where else might people have seen your warming stripes and like not really noticed that that's what they were looking at? Maybe.
They've been used in lots of places. I mean, the ones that so Reading Football Club used them on their kit for one season, as you mentioned. They've been used at London Fashion Week as well, which so I was invited by a designer called Lucy Tamam to a London Fashion Week show, and to see all these amazing dresses. And again, it's not something a climate scientist tends to go to. Fashion does not necessarily interest me particularly, but it was amazing to see these amazing creations of Lucy's parade up and down the catwalk. That was pretty remarkable. And there's a rock band also called Enter Shikari. They've used them worldwide in their tours. They've been painted on bridges, on buildings. They've been used as sails on sailing boats. They have been projected at very large scale onto all kinds of landmarks around the world. The Pope has a climate stripes stole that he was presented with. They've been they've been used all over the place. They're all cover of Greta Thunberg's book. Yeah, so many different places. It's hard to remember them all.
Ed, what's your motivation to keep going and to go forward? What like, so I know all of this thing is happening around you, that thing, but on a day-to-day basis, that probably doesn't really impact so much on your actual work that you're doing. Like what's motivating you to keep going, and what is it you want to achieve?
Well, I think we don't always recognise perhaps that we're already being affected by the climatic change we've already seen. It's often framed as being a future problem for our kids and grandkids to worry about, and that's not true. We are seeing every heavy rainfall event that we get today is worse than it would have been had it not been for our actions. Every heat wave is made hotter, and so we are all being affected every day, even without maybe realizing it always. And particularly in countries which are more vulnerable populations, they are definitely being very severely impacted by our actions already. And I think we need to communicate better at how we're affected today. It's not just a future problem to worry about. We don't always realise it. Whenever we see floods in the UK, those floods are worse because more rain has fallen from the sky than would otherwise be the case. And so we have to adapt our infrastructure and our everything else to try and deal with these change consequences, as well as do what we can to try and reduce future consequences.
Do you have hope for the future?
I have hope, right? And the hope comes from the fact that we've caused this problem. It is our actions which is warming the planet. In some ways, it'd be far worse if it wasn't us causing it, right? Because then we'd have no control over it. The fact that we do have control means that we can make choices to minimize the worst consequences. So that has to be a hopeful message to me, I think.
So attribution studies are now a big thing in terms of climate change. We can look at an event, we can look at the fingerprint of climate change, we can see how more likely it's become or how much more frequent or intense. How important is that for us to be able to look at an event and attribute it to climate change in as real time as we can, really, as quickly as we can? Why is that important? Why do we need to be doing that?
Yeah, I think it's really important. And as you say, it's grown a lot over the last decade or so. And, there's several groups around the world, including World Weather Attribution based in London, led by Freddie Otto. And that team produces these assessments really quite quickly after events, within a week. And they're able to come up with estimates of how much more likely these events are, and often how their intensity has also changed. And I think it's really important to be able to communicate that fairly quickly because it's still in the memory of people. While we're still seeing the impacts, the flooding or the consequences from the heat wave or whatever it might be, to then talk about, well, yes, this event has been made worse by our actions, and in the future, if we don't cut our emissions, it will be even worse again if this same weather pattern happens. And so I think that's a really helpful message. to communicate to the people who are affected and the people who are nearby or heard about friends who are there to say, come on, your people are being affected here and now. My hope is that these types of effort do prompt some people to think about what they're doing and to take different choices about future actions.
I think it's important what you say as well, to say like the event now has been made more likely, but if we carry on like we are with the future warming, that same event could be even worse than what we've seen now. I think that's a really important message to say to people as well, to say to them,
Yeah.
like, we need to act, otherwise it will be even worse in however many years' time.
And I think that's really important. I agree. And it's also, I think, really important for some of the older historical events that we have. So, in the UK, if you're a certain age, you will always mention the summer of 1976, which was an incredibly hot summer and really rare for that climate. But, if we think about that event now, it would be even hotter today and even hotter in the future. And we've got the same with some of our older rainfall events, which, set records in some parts of the country still. Again, if those same weather patterns, which conspired to cause that really intense event, happened again, we would get more rain from those storms, or that heat wave would be even hotter. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing at the moment is on these historic events and trying to translate them into the modern and into the future to say, if this same weather pattern, which has already happened before, happened again, the consequences would be much worse. And I think that's a really helpful framing to add to this context of talking about the very recent events as well. I think there's a nice complementary approach that we can think about with past events as well.
Something both myself and Gemma have both been, I suppose, chatting about and stuff that we've been listening at Royal Met Soc as well, but just in journalism is about offering hope with, so we have these attribution studies and you say, we can say, okay, this was more like, okay, 2022 forever burned into my brain as the thing that happened in a climate paper I read, and one of the very first things I read, so there is that work to be done, but how do you counterbalance that? Is that something you focus on as a scientist, or is that something you leave the media to do, or do you think that's important for you to do that?
I mean, I think the one thing that we probably haven't done enough of actually is work with more social scientists to tell these stories more effectively. People respond to stories, I think, rather than facts and figures and numbers. And so I think, there's a lot more we could do about telling stories about events, how people have been affected, and about the future. And I think particularly about the future, we could definitely tell better stories about the future world that we might choose to live in. We often talk about avoiding the worst outcomes and avoiding this disastrous future. But I think we could also talk about this is the future that we could choose to live in, and it looks great. We've got renewable energy with energy security. We've got cleaner air from having fewer cars on the road spewing out lots of diesel and petrol fumes. All of these things which are positive visions for the future, we need to talk about more, as well as avoiding the negatives.
Yeah. Right, we're going to leave it there, but we do have a few questions before you go. They're just some fun questions. So Gemma, do you want to take it away? It's called Get to Know Me Round. So welcome to the Get to Know Me Round.
Okay, so our first question that we always ask everyone is, what is your favourite season?
Spring.
The right answer, Ed. The right answer. It is the best season by far. The days are getting longer, but you can still get snow. You can get warm weather. The blossoms are on the trees. Why is spring your favorite season?
It's the driest season. And there's lots of flowers. I know spring's great. It's the end of the dark winter, and I definitely think spring's the best.
There's so much hope when spring arrives. Like the birds, I've got an app on my phone that tells me the bird songs and the birds that are out, and it's just amazing to be able to sit there and listen to the bird songs. It's beautiful. So yeah. What is your favourite type of cloud?
Cumulonimbus.
Why is that?
It's just a great name for a cloud, I think. I'm not sure I've got a favourite type of cloud actually, but I think that would be if I had to pick one. Yeah, they're very dramatic.
They are, especially if you can see one in the distance, like moving across like the landscape. It's absolutely beautiful.
It's one of my favorite clouds to say when I'm in school. It's the one thing that I get all the kids to say, cumulonimbus cloud, so they all get to learn a little bit of science.
If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Flying, I think.
Oh, that would be good.
To soar up above. I don't know, to soar above everyone, and it'd be like a bird. It'd be great.
Be
Make a
above the
commute.
clouds as
Yeah,
well.
in the clouds, you know.
Exactly. That'd be amazing. If you could invite one person to dinner, and it can be anybody at all from any historical time frame or even a fictional character, who would you invite?
Uh, I would, I would probably like to chat to Guy Callender, who was the first person to discover that the world was warming, and to talk to him about the how he felt about it, and the resistance he faced by presenting this to the Royal Meteorological Society back in 1938.
That would be a really interesting conversation.
I
Me.
only learned that from a podcast actually. I didn't know that somehow. It's like a little gap in my, I didn't know, but yeah.
He's not very well known, and yeah,
No.
it's not a very well known fact. You know, we know lots of other names in our history, but he's one that's got missed a little bit.
Mm.
We need to make more of these people's names known and like actually
Mm.
raise awareness of some of the amazing people that have done such amazing
If
work in
more,
weather and climate.
yeah, and if more so just for the length of time that we've known,
Mm,
you know, how much power
Yes,
like the media has, you know.
yeah.
people often say, you know, it's for some modern, made up scam that's going on, but that's no, the physics has been thought about and studied and worked out for 150 years, and we don't make enough of that either. I don't think.
Would you prefer to go to the beach or the mountains?
Mountains.
Oh, why?
I just love climbing hills, and you get the peace, the freedom, the quiet. Yeah, that's definitely the one for me.
Yeah.
Do you not like sand though as well?
Beach is just too busy, and I prefer to be up in the hills where there's far fewer people around and it's a bit quieter.
The
You're
one
more
thing,
likely to have a quiet moment, like
mm,
just be on your own, just have the place to yourself if you're on the mountains, yeah.
Yeah.
And finally, oh, this is a hard one to ask you actually. We normally ask what's the one thing you wish everyone knew about the weather, but I think we'll mix it up a bit. So we'll ask, what is one thing that you wish everybody knew about the climate?
The one thing that I wish everyone knew about the climate was that we are already being affected today by the fact that our climate is changing.
thank you so much for your time today.
No problem. Thank you, guys. That was
We're
really fun.
so grateful. But yeah, we hopefully I'll see you again sometime soon. And
That'd be
good luck.
great. Yeah.
If you have loved this episode, we would love it if you would subscribe, rate, and review and share the podcast. It really helps us to share the podcast with more people. And the more people we can have talking about the weather and climate, for us, that's the main mission here. If you would like to follow Ed on social media, you can find him on Instagram at Climate Hawkins. He's also on Blue Sky, Ed Hawkins there, and you can find him on LinkedIn. And you should definitely go and check out the Show Your Stripes website as well, where you can download the warming stripes for different parts of the world, at different countries, and also for cities as well. You can follow us on Instagram. We are For the Love of Weather. We're also on X and we're also on Blue Sky. So just search for the Love of Weather on both of those and you'll find us. And we just hope that you leave this episode loving the weather just that little bit more.
Thanks for listening. Bye.